Hey there, you made it to episode 3. Welcome back. So let's go ahead and hop right in, and we're going to go right to the Hack the Box website, and let's go ahead and spin up Blue. So we're going to be working on Blue here, and what we're going to be doing is working on MS17010. We're going to talk about that and its importance here in a second. First and foremost, I want you guys to spin up this machine and go ahead and go into your terminal and start scanning it. While we're scanning it, we can use our common stall tactics and talk about the machine a little bit, and then we'll get back into the actual script. So as always, our scan should look something like this, or whatever your favorite nmap or mass scan is. And then I'm going to go ahead and type in the IP address, which I have already forgotten. It is 10.10.10.40. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Quick intro, I know. So episode 3, we are going to be covering MS17010, aka Eternal Blue. Now, this is super important. It's going to be easy. We're gonna nail this machine several different ways. We're going to look at the Metasploit way, and some of you have been asking for manual ways, which I know why. We'll look at the manual method of doing this as well, and talk about some precautions, how to check for it as well. So MS17010 is a vulnerability that was released a couple years ago via SMB. I have been harping on SMB the first couple episodes. We're going to harp on SMB at least one more time here. And SMB is just so dangerous, right? And where we're at here is this vulnerability is a couple of years old, but it's still very significant. Now, you may have heard of the WannaCry vulnerability that used MS17010 as part of its payload in order to navigate around networks and do ransomware on networks. So very, very disgusting vulnerability, very costly, right? And why is this critical? Well, you see this on penetration tests all the time, especially, well, definitely internals. Not as much on the external side. You know, there's Shodan and other tools now that people can just search for this. And if you still have this running on your external network, chances are you've probably been popped. But on the internal side, see it all the time, have exploited it multiple times on internal penetration tests. In fact, the latest time that I have seen it was this past week while doing an internal penetration test. So this vulnerability, while simple, is super critical. It allows us to have a remote code execution and gain system access on a machine. On top of that, it's still very, very common in networks. So the reason we're going to cover this is, 1, it's common, it's critical, you're still going to see it. 2, it's SMB, which covers along with the theme that we've been seeing. 3, it's still an easy machine, right? We're still noobs. We're still trying to get through some of the easy stuff. We got to cover the easies and the basics before we can get into anything else. So while you might be like, wow, that was easy, sometimes it is this easy. And 4, because we not only get to play with Metasploit here, but we also get to play with AutoBlue. So we'll do it the manual way as well. Okay, so if we look at this here, you can see that we have our scan back. You come through, and you'll start to notice things as you see them. But when I'm looking at a machine and I see SMB, right? We've got RPC, which is common to see with SMB, and you got a bunch of RPC ports down here. We're not going to worry about RPC today. We're worried about SMB. And we could see that it pulled back a version of Windows for us. Now, it's Windows 7 Professional 7601 Service Pack 1. When I see something like this, ding, 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 I'm thinking Eternal Blue right away, okay? So that's the first thing I'm probably checking, honestly, when I see this. Now, we have talked in the past, and I'm not going to cover the tools because we covered them the last 2 times, right? This is just kind of gradually advancing from where we've been. We could look at this with SMB client, and we could say, hey, SMB client, can I connect to 445. And can I get there? Can I view the file shares? We can also run Metasploit on this and see what kind of SMB version is running. We could also scroll down to the bottom. There's always some SMB information down here. So you could see that it's a Windows 7, again, down here, Professional 6.1, a little bit of information. We got a PC name. We're in a work group, so we're not in a domain here. And we see message signing is disabled, and then it says over here it's enabled but not required, which is pretty much the same thing as disabled because, it's still a vulnerability here. So we talked about that as well, and as we get more advanced, we'll cover that. But this is more Active Directory, internal pen testing stuff, as I mentioned before. So, okay, we notice we've got SMB. We have in the past heard that, hey, a recent exploit is called AutoBlue, MS17010. And another thing that I should note is when you're doing Hack the Box, a lot of times, look, they give you a hint, okay? They give you a hint. If you notice some of these, if you look through these like Devil, if you look through, Legacy is even kind of a hint. Sunday is a hint. Active is a hint slightly. Some of these curling, you might have to think, hey, that might have to do with curl. There's always, I wouldn't say always, but a good amount of the time, something in the box name relates to something you're going to have to do. So blue probably stands out right away. That's why I'm not like going through the scan and saying, hey, I don't know what it could be. Let's enumerate this right off the bat. When you have MS17010, you have it. Okay. So we're going to do this two ways. First way we're going to do is the AutoPwn method. So let's go with MSF console and let's talk about a couple things here. Once we load this up, say we're doing a real pen test. First things first, we want to confirm that we think it is AutoBlue. We want to make sure that we can see that. So what we can say is we could say search MS17010, something like that. And there is this auxiliary scanner here, right? We just want to know, does AutoBlue exist? Do we think it exists? So that's important first, right? You don't just want to fire an exploit without confirming or at least having a good hunch that this exists. Also, it should be noted too that, I screwed that up. SMB MS17010. It should also be noted that this exploit can tip a machine over. So if you're doing it on an internal environment, make sure that it's not a significant machine. Like if this was a domain controller, you probably want to call up, the client and say, hey, I'm about to use an exploit. Can I use this? It may tip your machine over. Are you ready in case that happens? If this is just like a workstation, it's iffy. They kind of maybe expect you being in there, but still you don't know who's working on what. And it would suck to lose all your work as well. So best practice might be just to call all the time. So we could say options here. And then all we have to do is set an R host. So the R host that we're going to set is 10.10.10.40. And then we'll say options. And everything else looks like it is set. So it's going to check for named pipes here in this exploit. That's kind of how it works. Now this is complicated, way more over my head than I'll ever be able to fully understand. But it has to be able to find a named pipe in order to actually exploit. So let's go ahead and just run this check here. And you'll get this. It'll say host is likely vulnerable to MS17010, and it pulls it back. Hey, it's 64-bit. Perfect. Okay, so if we scroll back up a tiny bit, there are a few different ones. There is MS17010 AutoBlue. There is a PS exec version. And there is Windows 8 here. So this is for, what is it? It's for Windows 7 and I forget the other operating system. You can run these on Windows 10 and other servers. This is a server 2008, 2012. I don't remember which one it is. But, it's always worth checking, especially nowadays. If you're running something like Nessus is going to pull up and say, hey, we found eternal blue, at least we think we do, especially like on an internal assessment. But if you don't have those sorts of tools available to you, you could do this sort of check here. So let's go ahead and just say use, and then I'm just going to paste what I just copied there. And sorry, I'm clumsy. If you guys hear some shaking, I keep hitting my microphone. Okay, options. And again, all we got to do is set the R host for this. So this says 2008 R2 and Windows 7. I used it on other machines. I've used it on Windows 10 before and it's worked. Okay, so now we are good. And we can do show targets like I've said in the past. All there is one target here. So let's run it. Now this exploit doesn't always work on the first try. It's kind of a finicky exploit. So we'll let it run here and see if it actually works. And it's worked first time. Awesome, great. So you see we got the win, and then might just have to hit enter here. And we are on the system, okay? So we have a command shell. We could say, who am I? And we are authority system on the host name of Harris PC. Not bad, this is pretty good. We can improve this, I believe. So let's go ahead and hit yes, abort session. Control C and then abort the session. We'll close the shell. Let's type in options again. Now you can see that we used a generic reverse shell here. See the payload? Generic /shell reverse TCP. Now this is what we consider an unstaged payload. A staged payload would have a / here, meaning that it sends this payload in stages, right? So it would say, hey, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. But because we don't have this / here, we can identify this as an unstaged payload, meaning that it sends this all at once. So there's different pros and cons to both. My recommendation is always, if you're having trouble getting a shell and you're pretty sure that there's an exploit available, consider changing this to a staged payload here. And I'm sure we're going to encounter that as we go further, but I can show you the differences here as well. So we can say something like set payload. And what I want here is I am a Windows fanboy, right? And this is going to, if we auto tab, so Windows x64, and I said Windows fanboy, I'm a Meterpreter fanboy. So we could say Meterpreter. If it's available, it is. Okay. And then we just say Meterpreter. And this is staged, right? Look at the stages. And then reverse TCP. This is the one we're going to want. So let's go ahead and select that first. And what we're doing here is we're improving our payload. So we're going from this generic shell, and you saw what it brought us into. It brought us into a command prompt. That's okay, but we could do better. So we're going to set this payload here. Now, if we went back and we just said set payload and we did Windows x64 and I double tabbed, you can see there's other stuff besides Meterpreter in here. They have a shell. Look at this bind TCP or look at this reverse TCP. See the / here? This is a staged payload. Look at this one here. This is unstaged. So this sends in multiple stages. This kind of sends all at once. Okay, so it's always good to try both. And if you're struggling, say with the Meterpreter in general, going to a generic reverse TCP like this is always a good option as well, just to try out different payloads and make sure that you're not losing your mind with attacking with the right exploit but not having the right payload. So payloads are important as well. So we already have our payload selected. Let's go ahead and say options. And you could see it picks for us our L host, that's correct, and our L port, that is correct, that's fine. We're gonna go ahead and say run now. Or you could type in exploit if you wanna be cool. You can see the payload option changed up here from the generic as well. So good to note. So we'll let this run, see if it works. It's possible that it doesn't work with this Meterpreter. It could be too much for it, and maybe that's why we're using generic, but hopefully we can improve this shell here. And while we're waiting on this, what we can do is we can go out to the interwebs, and we can hit the plus arrow, get a new tab going. So what we're going to look for is a tool called AutoBlue. and we'll just type in GitHub. There's perfect. Google already knows what we want. AutoBlue MS17010. So we're going to try this here. And if we go to the GitHub, we read through it. It tells you what it is. So it has a Python eternal blue checker here. So it'll tell us, hey, does this work or not work? This will also come down and it will allow us to compile shellcode similar to what we're doing. Shellcode will just be the payload that we're using. It'll allow us to compile that and set up a listener with Meterpreter, and then we can just pwn it. It'll all make sense here in a minute. It's just a little bit more manual of a method, and this one's actually pretty good. The one in the past when Eternal Blue first came out was like it was a little bit more hands-on, a little bit more detailed. This one has made it way more comfortable to use and user-friendly. So my advice is if you're looking for an alternative to Meterpreter, and this is still going to use Meterpreter, though you do not have to. You can see in here it's going to say 0 for Meterpreter shell, 1 for a regular command shell. I always like the Meterpreter shell just because you get extra. I understand there's situations, certain exams where you can't, right? In that instance, I think it's best still to practice with this and practice the other way as well, and just get comfortable with both. But if I had the choice on a real world assessment, I'm always using Meterpreter because of the flexibility. Okay, so let's go back here. You see that we got a shell. This is perfect. It failed the first time. I told you guys it might fail. That happens, but we got to win here. Same thing, we could get the UID. We are authority system, sysinfo here. Okay, we've got a Meterpreter 64-bit and an architecture 64-bit. Wonderful. That's what we want, right? Remember from the previous episodes, first things first, why not dump some hashes, right? So now we can take these hashes and we can try to pass them around the network. We can try to, crack them as well with Hashcat or John or whatever, and see if this gets us a foothold anywhere else in our network. We can also dive into the machine and look for valuable information. We can look at the routing table. We can go into a shell and we can say like route print. Okay, where does this talk to? And this isn't going to talk to anything. It's not really the best example because there's no dual homed machines that I know of, at least in Hack the Box. So 10.10.10.2 is its gateway. We can look at that. We can look at ARP-A and see what's in the ARP table and what machines that it talks to. It's only going to talk to itself. Netstat-ANO. So, and if you're not familiar with these commands, again, I know I've mentioned them before, but it's important to learn some of these common networking commands and what we're trying to do. Netstat's going to show what ports are open and what ports we're talking to. You can see that we have a close wait on our last shell here, and then we open up a new port, and this is us communicating here on PID of 1068. And we can come back, and if you're curious about how that works, if we look for 1068, okay, this is apparently what we came in on, this spool sv.exe. You can kind of look around and gain some information about, the forensics side of things as well. I'm no good at forensics, but it's always interesting to look at these PPIDs and the PIDs and see the parent PID and the PID to see, okay, where do we come in at? Do we see any kind of information here? This is also good for migration, which we'll talk about at a later time when we have to do it. As of now, we haven't had to migrate, so that's a little bit of a later lesson. So we've gathered hashes. We can gather network information. We can go look at files in the file system. Of course, you can go and dump your hashes. So your hashes are going to be in the administrator folder for the root hash and the user folder for the user hash. And I won't show you how to do that because I've already showed you a couple times now. So this is the method for the automated Metasploit. And we can also say, there's load commands. I'm not sure if I've shown you guys these before, but we can load something like Kiwi, and Kiwi will do, we could say help, and we could do like a creds all dump and try to dump all the credentials that we can. Nothing came back here. That's okay. But it's cool. We can dump Kerberos, we could dump the W digest, and you don't have to know what any of this is right now. Just know that we have a lot of power with Meterpreter. We can dump the Wi-Fi list, the Wi-Fi shared list here. We can change passwords, can dump the SAM, right? Let's see, LSA dump SAM. Okay, there's the SAM that we just saw with the hash dump. We could dump secrets, right? So there is a lot going on here. Incognito is another great tool that I'm not going to get into, but we can look at, for example, we can say list tokens for users, and then we can impersonate a user if there's one of value here. Way advanced topic. I'm just trying to show you the flexibility that we have here and really hammer down that like Meterpreter is very, very flexible. On top of that, which we're not going to get into today either, is Meterpreter has a bunch of post exploitation commands, and you're going to see one in an upcoming video on running a post exploit suggester. So when we get to that, you'll get to see the post commands and how they work as well. So we'll focus those at a later time. So let's go ahead and I'm going to exit out of all of this, and I'm going to exit here too. And let's go download this this GitHub repository here. So if we click on this clone download and just copy this link, we can go back in, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change directory to my op folder because that's where I like to put my files or my programs. And if you don't have Git, I don't know if it comes pre-installed. App install Git, like that, will get you what we're about to use. So git clone, and then we're going to paste this in here. And then we are going to say cd to AutoBlue ls, and it looks like it's all ready for us. So if we go back into the instructions, come down here, now it's got an eternalblue checker.py. And if we look, we've got the eternalblue checker right here. So let's run Python against that. And we'll just say 10.10.10.40, similar to the instructions it told us to run with an IP address. Hit enter. And it says the target is not patched. Okay? So that means that it's likely vulnerable. This is telling us, this is another way. When I want to use something on an assessment to prove, say that I ran the exploit and the exploit's not working, but I have a good feeling that the exploit is there, the vulnerability is there. There are times where MS-17 is there, you cannot exploit it without a valid user. There's times where you have no pipes. This says it's testing the named pipes. There are more pipes than this, and that's what Meterpreter found. But there are times where you have to have a user of any kind. Doesn't have to be admin, but just a user of any kind. And it will allow us to get a shell on this machine. So this is good. This is another way to check. You saw how to check with Metasploit. Now you can see how to check with this tool as well. And what we can do here is we can follow the instructions now on how to actually generate this. So we're going to navigate to the shellcode folder, and we're going to generate some shellcode. And all this is the payload, right? The payloads that you were seeing just a minute ago, the Meterpreter payloads, the generic payloads, all we're doing is generating this a little bit manually. This is actually going to do it for us, which is super nice, super friendly. So we're going to run the shellprep.sh, and it's going to say, do you want to generate a reverse shell with MSF Venom? We'll say, yeah, why not? And then what's our L host? So that's us. What's the listening host? So let's go to a new tab, and I'm going to blow this up. We'll say ifconfig, or IPA if you like the new version of doing it. 10.10.14.24 for me. Okay. What's the port we want to listen in on? We'll say 4445 just to be different. And then for x86, we need a different one. Not that this is going to be x86. We already know it's x64, but that's fine. So now, do we want to generate a Meterpreter shell, or do we want to generate a regular command shell? If we're going completely manual, we'll generate a command shell. But just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to generate a Meterpreter shell. And do we want to be staged or stageless? We'll try with staged first, and if not, we'll try with stageless afterwards, but we tried a stage payload and it worked. So we'll do that again here and see if we can't get it to work. And you can see the commands it's running. So it's running MSF Venom, which is a payload generator. We're going to get into that in a later episode as well on how to generate payloads. Actually, I think the next episode is going to cover that. And you can see it's just generating a payload for the x64. You see the 64 bin here that it has, and it's generating one for the x86 as well. So 64-bit and 32-bit, different ports, same kind of idea. It's just doing everything for us. We could do this ourselves if we wanted to. All right, so coming through here, now it says we need to do a run listener, or the run listener prep. So we got to go back a directory, say ls, make sure we're in the right directory. Okay, we're going to do listener prep.sh. Now we got to generate a listener. So again, we need our L host. I believe I'm at 26 or 24? 24. I used to be 26. Okay, and we said 4445, 4446. 0 and 0. So what this is doing is this is going to start up Metasploit. Metasploit has something called an exploit handler, and I will be showing you guys that as well. So we can use exploit handler to set up a listener. So we're listening here in the background for any connections that come through on our IP address at 4445 or 4446. And that's all. So it has to know the payload that you use. So we're actually using a Windows x64 Meterpreter reverse underscore TCP payload. So the payload that we generate, which you saw what we generated earlier, MSF Venom payload, this payload here has got to match the listener. So the listener is defining the payload, and that's why it's asking these questions. Hey, do you want to set up a Meterpreter listener? Do you want it to be staged like this or unstaged? Do you want it to be 64-bit? Blah, blah, blah. So it's doing that, and it set us up, and then you see it set us up here without a 64-bit payload, and it's just handling this for us. So now we've got the multi-handler running. I've got a new tab already opened up, so you guys can open up a new tab as well. Let's scroll down to the pwn down here. So this has been tested on Windows 7, Server 2008, and Windows 10. It should work on Windows 8 and Server 2012 as well. So if we say cd ... back to our main folder, now what we need to do is we need to say AutoBlue exploit7.py is what it looks like. So we'll say Python AutoBlue exploit7.py. All right. We need the target IP, which we know is 10.10.10.40. We need the path to the shellcode scall bin, which is just going to be shellcode here, scall bin. That's what it generated for us. And then the number of groom connections. Now, I don't know exactly what the groom connections are. I know that it's super important. I think it starts with 12 or 13, and then we can set it manually if we're having issues. But let's go ahead and just leave that blank. Okay, so it fired off, and it looks like we got a session. So we could type in sessions now, and you could see that we've got authority system on session 1. So we just type in sessions 1, we've interacted. Same thing, get UID, who am I, or host name if we can. Doesn't know host name, that's okay. You do sysinfo, and that's where you get your host name. So that's it, that's really it. Like, from here, we took an easy exploit, but we learned several things today, right? We learned that we can do the exploit manually. We can also use Metasploit to do it. We learned about different types of payloads. There are staged versus unstaged. Now, I encourage you to go read up on what the benefits are of both and what the differences are, but you should know that they exist, and you should know that the alternative might be an option, or even the generic payload might be an option, that if you're sure or unsure, maybe try changing your payload before giving up completely on an exploit. And we learned a little bit about MSF Venom. We're going to learn more about that in the next video. We learned about some load commands for Meterpreter, again, how to dump hashes, some important network commands. So really another SMB exploit that we can just take and build upon. And that's all we're after. We're just going to continue building on these exploits and get better, hopefully. So This is the end of episode 3. If you enjoyed it, please, again, like, subscribe, share, tell a friend. That's all I got for you. So until the next episode, I am TCM, and I thank you for joining me.